Trump has been declaring victory on his quote-unquote deal with Iran to avoid, in his words, the whole civilization dying, but it turns out that the deal is an unmitigated win for Iran and loss for the United States. So here's what we have to show for Operation Epic Fury. Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz. Iran gets to charge tolls now on ships passing through the strait, and Iran gets to keep its enriched uranium, which is necessary to develop nuclear weapons, which we were led to believe was the point of this entire thing. In other words, Iran offered up basically no concessions, and now they'll have even more money to rebuild. And what do we have to show for all of our efforts? Well, we've got 13 dead Americans, almost 400 wounded, the largest oil supply disruption in recorded history, gas prices surging toward $4.30 a gallon nationally, and we'll have to contend with an Iranian regime led by another guy named Khamenei, who is reportedly even more hardline than his father, and who now has a personal vendetta against the United States. So, art of the deal? And according to ABC News, Donald Trump had the audacity to call it a, quote, beautiful thing. I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't see how any human being, even Donald Trump, could look at what happened here and not see that we just got rolled. Think about it. Before February 28th of this year, the Strait of Hormuz was an international waterway. Ships passed through freely. That was the standard. It was the baseline. Now, the ceasefire plan includes provisions that would let Iran charge tolls on ships using the strait, reportedly up to $2 million in crypto. That's a fee that did not exist previously, all because the strait was considered an international waterway. In other words, Iran has now converted a shared global resource into a revenue stream for itself. Not because they earned it, but because Trump started a war, lost the leverage, and folded. And now he's calling it a win. Here's what Trump actually said when he was asked about Iran charging tolls on ships.
I had a conversation with the president this morning about all of this. He clearly believes that it was his threats that caused the Iranians to agree to things that they wouldn't have agreed to before. He acknowledged that China played a role here in bringing about this ceasefire agreement. Obviously, Pakistan as well. But I asked him about some of the many unanswered questions here. Iran is saying in their 10-point proposal that they would maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. They're talking about charging a toll of $2 million per ship that passes through it. They didn't have control of the strait before the war, so this would be a step back. I asked President Trump if he's okay with that, if he's okay with Iran charging a toll, and his answer was quite stunning. He said maybe it will be a joint venture. And I said, a joint venture between the U.S. and Iran? And he said, yes. He said, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Maybe we'll do that.
A joint venture with Iran, the country that we just went to war with, that we're still at war with, the country that killed 13 American service members, the country that, according to the IAEA, possesses over 400 kilograms of enriched uranium to 60% purity. That's a nearly 50% increase since just February. That country. Trump wants to go into business with them and split the profits from a toll booth on the world's most critical oil passage. Sure, why not? And while we're at it, maybe we can launch that cybersecurity task force with Russia that Trump wanted so badly, while we're on the topic of insane things that should never happen. And look, even setting aside this insane idea of a joint venture, the damage is already done. Like, the moment Iran gained control of the strait, they gained something that they never had before. If Iran's toll booth policy stands, it could earn them roughly $500 billion over the next 5 years. That cash would allow Iran to not just rebuild its military multiple times over, but it could be the key to finally developing the nuclear weapon that we allegedly started this war to stop them from obtaining. In other words, we went to war specifically to stop Iran from developing a nuke, and the deal that we came out with could fund them building a nuke. That's not a victory. That is a catastrophic, historic failure wearing a mission accomplished banner, something that the Republican Party seems quite adept at doing. And speaking of the nuclear program, let's be crystal clear about where things stand here. The Farsi version of Iran's 10-point ceasefire plan included the phrase acceptance of enrichment. But in the English version, shared with journalists, that phrase was mysteriously absent. So Iran is putting out two different versions of the same deal, one for their people and one for ours. And that is the agreement that Donald Trump is calling a total and complete victory. So he's either being played or he knows what they're doing and doesn't care. And I genuinely don't know which one is worse. And by the way, don't take my word on any of this. This was Fox News' thoughts on the matter just today.
But I will say that the president's demands, we have not reached any of those objectives. I have full confidence that the president is going to find some way to make this happen. But he said that we want to dismantle all major nuclear facilities. That has not happened. The end of uranium enrichment on the soil, they're still enriching. The transfer of the enriched uranium stockpiles out of Iran, that hasn't happened. The acceptance of intrusive international inspections, they're still not willing to do that. And they have not suspended their ballistic missiles program. They're still firing them off to stop the production of the long-range missiles. That's just a few of them on the president's proposal. The question is the president using this 2 weeks to give our soldiers a break, a rest, to see if we can get this ultimately done? We'll see.
Yeah, not great when even the state TV guys don't know how to spin this one. And let me be precise about something here because I don't want to overstate anything. This is a ceasefire, not a final deal. The formal negotiations have not yet concluded. There is a 2-week window now. Maybe something better comes out of it. I genuinely hope so. But based on what's on the table right now in front of us, based on the terms that Iran is claiming and that Donald Trump is calling workable, this is an L. Donald Trump pulled us out of the JCPOA in 2018. He called it a horrible one-sided deal, said Iran would never get nuclear weapons on his watch, said that he was the greatest deal maker in the history of the world, and so after waging a voluntary war that killed American troops, crashed energy markets, triggered the worst oil supply shock since the 1970s, and left Iran in a stronger strategic position than when they started this war, Donald Trump wants you to know that it's a big day for world peace. The emperor has no clothes, and the American people deserve to know it. You're watching the No Lie podcast. Next up are my interviews with Congressman Ro Khanna and Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta. No Lie is sponsored by BetterHelp. Financial stress affects far more than our bank accounts. It can take a serious toll on mental health and relationships, with 88% of Americans feeling some form of financial stress at the start of 2026. Money worries often bring anxiety, sleep disruption, and even depression, and are one of the leading sources of conflict for couples. Especially with the way that things are going in politics today, Donald Trump has taken an already bad issue and got it even worse, with cuts to healthcare, food assistance, higher gas prices, and the cost of everyday goods. Which is why I'm an advocate for therapy. Therapy isn't about financial advice, it's about managing the stress, shame, or anxiety that can come with it. Therapy can help people unpack their relationship with money, build healthier coping strategies, and feel less alone in the process. So why BetterHelp? Because of their quality therapists. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the US. Then there's BetterHelp's therapist match commitment. BetterHelp does the initial matching work for you so that you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences, and then their more than 12 years of experience and industry-leading match fulfillment rate means that they typically get it right the first time. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recommendations. And their client reviews prove it. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 6 million people globally. And it works, with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/nolie. That's betterhelp.com/nolie. No Lie is brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the next day like I used to. I have to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day. That is, until I found pre-alcohol. So what is pre-alcohol? ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. So here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Every time I have pre-alcohol before drinks, I notice a difference the next day. Even after a night out, I can confidently plan on being on camera and doing my work without worry, which, let's be honest, without pre-alcohol would not be possible. I feel like I age in dog years during doing politics, and what I was capable of bouncing back from a couple of years ago is not possible anymore. So I first gave pre-alcohol a try when I was at Crooked Media's holiday party a couple of years back. I drank it before my first whiskey ginger, and you would not believe how on top of my game I felt the very next day. So from the fairways in Augusta to the first pitch of baseball season and the start of festival circuits, April is the sprint of outdoor celebrations. Do not let a rough next day keep you on the sidelines. Drink pre-alcohol to stay ahead of the game and make the most of every single sunny Saturday. Go to zbiotics.com/BTC to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code BTC at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/BTC and use code BTC at checkout for 15% off. No Lie is brought to you by Rocket Money. So I'm not a money guy, I'm not a numbers guy, I'm not part of that world. Trying to figure this stuff out not only takes a ton of time, but causes me a ton of stress. And especially considering how limited my time is, I don't want to waste it worrying about managing my finances. But since I've started using Rocket Money, I can claw back that precious time actually relaxing and not poring over my finances. So what is Rocket Money? Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money allows you to track subscriptions and cancel them within the app with just a few taps, saving you time and helping you avoid charges. You can even categorize automatic transactions across your accounts and customize categories with tags to help shed light on your spending patterns. And especially considering everything is an automatic monthly transaction these days, having that help with coordinating and managing all of it is beyond helpful. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/Brian. That's rocketmoney.com/Brian. rocketmoney.com/Brian. I'm joined now by Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So a lot to talk about right now, but I think the first things first is in the aftermath of Donald Trump's kind of unhinged threat of basically annihilating the entirety of the Iranian population, which, you know, he's obviously since walked back from the edge on. Can you speak about the need, the call to invoke the 25th Amendment from Trump's cabinet members?
This shouldn't even be debated. He threatened genocide. He threatened to wipe out an entire Iranian people from the face of the earth. Of course, he needs to be removed from office. Of course, Democrats need to take every possible step, either by the invocation of the 25th Amendment or impeachment, to make sure that he's removed. This is about fighting for our moral vision of the country.
You know, that there are going to be Republicans who say this is just how Trump negotiates. He was never really going to do it. You Democrats are being too sensitive. And in the end, he got a deal anyway. So what would your reaction to that be?
America has never threatened evil. Even Richard Nixon, who came up with the madman theory, the unpredictability of a president, never threatened to annihilate all of the Vietnamese people. FDR never threatened to wipe out all the German people. Reagan never threatened to wipe out all the Russian people. There is something evil about a president threatening that, saying that America is indifferent to human life. And I don't care whether it's a negotiation technique. It compromises everything we believe in, which is the dignity of human life. There are plenty of other ways to be a bold negotiator and make credible threats short of genocide.
You know, when we think about the 25th Amendment, it doesn't happen unless his cabinet actually does it. I mean, inherently, that is how the tool is exercised. But he's filled his cabinet with people who are loyalists for him. I mean, you know, that is actually the only qualification to be a member in good standing of the Trump cabinet. And so how do you reconcile the impasse that we would be at where you would need cabinet members to sign on to this effort, but the cabinet members are only there because they are undyingly loyal to the president?
Well, that's why we need to pursue both the 25th Amendment and impeachment. I mean, here's the reality. The Republicans threw out this 25th Amendment unfairly against Joe Biden, who still had all his faculties and judgment when he was president. Yeah. And yet the Democrats, who actually have an issue of a president who's gone crazy, are not being bold enough to say, look, this is this time where we need a 25th Amendment. This is the time we need an intervention, where you have a president saying that you may wipe out Iran. What is he going to say tomorrow? Is he going to say we could wipe out Cuba? Is he going to say wipe out Gaza? We need to have a check on this president. So my view is that this is the time where the Democrats need to fight. We need to fight with every tool available, the 25th Amendment, impeachment, and say that we're standing up for the moral integrity of America, for our values. And a lot of the base is upset that they don't see that passion, that clarity, that fight in the Democrats. They can count the votes. They know it's an uphill battle, but they want us to fight and make sure we're standing up with every fiber of our being against an illegal war.
And I completely agree. And in fact, that has been, I think, the most important thing to focus on, this idea of finding Democrats who are willing to fight, who are willing to exercise power. I have a book coming out in a couple of months that is all about exercising power when we have it. I want to play devil's advocate here, though, and say and ask you about this idea that, okay, let's say there is an impeachment fight that actually does boil to the surface. I feel like there's a world where Trump could look at that and say, that's actually exactly what I want, because that can negatively polarize, that can polarize the country. And then we can have a situation where I get to play the victim. I get to say that the Democrats are coming after their favorite president, and all of those Republicans who might have been on the fence about certain things like Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert, Thomas Massie, will suddenly feel like, okay, if this is just going to be the usual D versus R food fight, then I can, rally the troops again.
Brian, if this was 2020, then I would understand your points. But now you have Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for the 25th Amendment. Now you have his base having felt betrayed because of his protecting the Epstein class, because of his protecting pedophiles, because of his starting wars of choice. And you know what I'm hearing from Democrats? I'm hearing that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson shoot stronger statements than many Democrats did.
Yep.
And they are frustrated that you have bland statements issued in press releases when the Trump is threatening genocide. They want us to fight. And just because we're pursuing impeachment or the 25th Amendment doesn't mean that we're going to forget the rest of the agenda. We're going to fight for the working class. We're going to fight for universal child care, for expanding Medicare for all. We're going to fight for a living wage. We're going to fight for paid family time off. We're going to fight to tax billionaires. But you know what we're also going to do? We're going to fight for elite accountability. We're going to hold people who violated the law, who think they don't have to follow the rules. We're going to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly put. I want to switch topics here now to Pam Bondi. News has just come out that Pam Bondi is not planning on attending the sworn deposition on April 14th, so less than a week from now. Can I have your reaction to the legality, first and foremost, of this move, and whether it feels like the House is going to settle for Pam Bondi's refusal to comply?
Well, it's illegal. Nancy Mace and I wrote a letter this morning to Comer. That's what precipitated Bondi's response. And we said that we still expect Pam Bondi to come. The subpoena that Nancy Mace and I drafted, the motion said Pam Bondi as an individual. It did not say Pam Bondi in her role as Attorney General. So we're going to continue to pursue this. She's going to appear before the committee. I mean, if Jim Comer could trace like Captain Ahab, Hillary Clinton to come 20 years after she was in office, certainly Pam Bondi needs to appear. And we're also going to continue to push for testimony from all the other people in the Epstein class implicated.
In terms of the logistics behind forcing compliance with the subpoena, is this something that would be voted on in committee, in which case the fact that Nancy Mace is on our side, the accountability side, doesn't bode well for Pam Bondi's ability to not comply? Or is it going to be a unilateral decision by James Comer to determine whether or not that subpoena is valid?
No, it will be voted on in committee, and Comer knows that. He knows he doesn't have the votes. And then Nancy and I would bring a subpoena again for Pam Bondi as an individual. This is just a delay tactic. We'd have to vote for it again. My guess is we won't even have to vote. They will find an alternative date for Bondi, and it's just a issue of delaying and buying her time. But we have the votes, and we also need to vote to subpoena now Todd Blanche, who's the acting Attorney General, to get him to appear. But it is awfully convenient, Brian, that the president fires Pam Bondi a week or two before she's scheduled to appear in the Oversight Committee. It just highlights that there is a cover-up. This is one of the biggest scandals in American history, and it's been one of the biggest cover-ups in American history.
Well, we've spoken about my next question a few times, but I think for posterity, it's worth reiterating here. And that is, what happens in the event that Pam Bondi decides not to comply when the only agency that would be tasked with holding her to account for failing to comply with a subpoena would be the very Department of Justice that we all know would never lay a finger on Pam Bondi?
Well, and this is why we can't just, as Democrats say, when we win in 26 and 28, we're going to move on and
Yeah.
move forward. We need to have accountability. And that accountability is going to start, of course, with prosecution of people who actually raped and abused these young girls on Epstein's Island and Ranch. But it's also going to mean accountability for people like Pam Bondi, who either covered up or if they fail to appear in front of a committee. That's criminal contempt. And when we have a majority in the House, we can vote for criminal contempt for Pam Bondi. So life is much longer than Donald Trump. He's soon going to be a lame duck. And soon people are going to realize that the Trump umbrella of protection no longer protects you when he's no longer in power.
What message would you have for Todd Blanche as he engages in similar behavior as Pam Bondi did, recognizing that Trump isn't going to be in office forever and that he's not going to have the tool and that Blanche isn't going to have the tools of the DOJ at his disposal forever?
Well, this is where there's a reckoning. Every person who violated the Epstein Transparency Act can be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. If you hid documents, if you engaged in redactions. And the next president should do something immediately, which is appoint a special counsel to deal with the Epstein issue. And that special counsel should meet with survivors lawyers, and really oversee to have full transparency, have all of the files released, no redactions, and see where there need to be investigations and prosecutions. By the way, the Senate should make this the fight in the new attorney general. I know there are many other issues, but this is the issue that the American people are outraged by, that a group of rich and powerful people have gotten away with things that they can. And we should insist that the new attorney general release all the files and pursue investigations and prosecutions.
Perfect place to leave off. Congressman, as always, thanks for your voice and thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you.
I'm joined now by the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta. Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Brian. Great to see you again.
So we've had some major news as it relates to Trump's illegal executive order blocking mail-in voting. Can you talk about what you and other attorneys general around the country are doing to prevent this from taking effect?
Absolutely. In short, when the executive order came down last week, we immediately started inspecting it for legal compliance and quickly concluded that it is not lawful. And so we brought a lawsuit by the end of the week, the same week, days later. And so we have a case filed already in federal district court, specifically the District of Massachusetts. We is 23 attorneys general and Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania. And we have taken Trump to court after he took this very desperate and unlawful and unconstitutional action to try to require citizenship lists that are used to filter and potentially block vote by mail ballots from being sent to eligible voters in the United States of America.
Are you confident that the courts will move fast enough to prevent this from taking place if they rule in your favor?
We feel very confident, and we can never speak for the court. The court is an independent, separate branch of government, co-equal branch of government who needs to act. But based on our prior lawsuit that we had with respect to Trump's executive order on elections, where we, in our case, the multi-state as well as multiple other cases, secured orders blocking a very unconstitutional action, we feel we can do the same thing here. And the way that the executive order is crafted and designed, it can't be in effect by the June primary elections, the ones coming up. It's June for California. So, but it potentially could be in effect by November. So the necessity of the court blocking and stopping this executive order is more applicable to November than it is to late spring and summer elections. So there's time for courts to act, and it is very clear in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, the Elections Clause, which very clearly states that the time, place, and manner of elections will be determined by states and Congress. There's no mention of the executive branch, no mention of the president, because the president, by constitutional design, has no role, zero role in determining the time, place, and manner of elections. And this executive order that he issued last week is a clear affront and trespass on that prohibition. And he is clearly violating the Constitution and the law more broadly, including the independence of the U.S. Postal Service, which is designed to be independent of executive influence, presidential influence. So there's multiple ways in which Trump is breaking the law here, violating the Constitution. So we feel confident we can secure an order to block this executive order from ever being implemented.
Okay, so it's clear that Trump, as president, has no ability to have some influence on elections, as you mentioned. But there is kind of the roundabout way, which is that these Republican governors, Republican attorneys general, Republican legislatures can kind of read the writing on the wall, can heed Trump's clarion call and say, okay, well, even if his executive order doesn't stand in the courts, we still got the message from him. And so is there any concern that notwithstanding however well Trump's executive order does in court, that these states are still going to adopt the overall message that's being put forward by Trump and kind of doing his bidding at the state level?
I don't see it here. That maybe, but not the design that's in the executive order. The executive order requires a national, a federal citizenship list, and it requires the action and implementation by the U.S. Postal Service. States, state legislatures, state governors have no authority over the U.S. Postal Service. Not only is the U.S. Postal Service independent of the President of the United States, it's definitely independent of the states and the state legislatures and state governors. So the way that this executive order is designed, I don't see any way that states can implement it on their own.
You had listed a few other states that were jumping in on this effort with you in California. Why are there no Republicans who are joining in on this effort, recognizing that, the state of Utah, for example, is an all mail-in voting state? I mean, Trump himself votes by mail, and it's not like the guy doesn't have a plane that can get him to Florida whenever he wants to be able to cast his ballot in person. And so a lot of these states rely on the infrastructure that they have. Republicans also vote by mail. And in fact, in large part, it was negligible, the difference before Trump, of course, came in and vilified mail-in voting. But prior to that, the difference between who cast ballots, Democratic or Republican voters, was literally negligible. And so how come your Republican counterparts in red states aren't also standing up to protect the infrastructure that they've built, and the fact that, they have Republican constituents who also want to take advantage of the convenience, accuracy, and safety of mail-in voting?
It's par for the course for Republican states, for red states, for Republican AGs to take the knee and cave and capitulate and allow the president to run roughshod over their constituents' rights, their freedoms, to take their funding away and to do nothing. And I've always believed that they were secretly rooting for Democratic AGs who are fighting for all those things, for rights, for freedoms, for funding, and that they would be able to benefit from our work. And they were sort of, with the metaphor of cyclists, they were drafting behind us.
Yeah.
And benefiting from our work. But it's them just caving to the Mad King and his conspiracy theories. And let's be clear: widespread voter fraud does not exist. It's only a figment of the imagination of Trump, of conspiracy theorists and crackpots. And the Republican AGs are buying into this wild and crazy belief of the president, and allowing their voters to have their right to vote suppressed and their voters to be disenfranchised in the process. So, and I say this with disappointment and with hope for a better future, and with knowledge that Democratic AGs and Republican AGs right now are working on a number of cases together, including lawsuits against Meta and against TikTok, a lawsuit that's in trial right now, going to closing argument later this week against Ticketmaster, Live Nation. There is still some bipartisanship, but not when it comes to challenging Trump's attacks on voting rights, on funding, on rights and freedoms. So it's very disappointing that they're not. They can and they should. But again, par for the course. Shocking, but not surprising.
Now, you had mentioned that a lot of these Republican attorney generals are hoping that Democrats succeed. Have you had any interaction with your Republican counterparts, out of the public view where they've expressed as much? Not just on this mail-in voting executive order, this illegal executive order, but maybe on other issues. I mean, right? Obviously, right now we're contending with threats of nuclear war with Iran. So from anything from that to the illegal an unconstitutional executive order regarding mail-in voting, have you heard from your Republican counterparts where they're kind of just, even if they may not feel comfortable coming out publicly against Donald Trump, that they're supportive of your efforts to do so?
I think they're more likely to share that information with fellow Republicans than with Democrats, across the aisle. But I have seen a number of signs supporting what I believe. When we interact with certain Republicans, they have a different posture and demeanor and approach than they do publicly. Their sort of private demeanor is cooperative and collaborative, at least on the issue that we're working on. And the issues may be limited, but the ones that come to mind are antitrust work, holding corporations who are violating antitrust law and disrupting free markets accountable, and also child safety work, like the mental health of kids on social media platforms like Meta and TikTok. They're reasonable, they're collaborative. We've worked towards a common goal. They don't criticize Trump in those settings, and nor do we. We're just working on a common goal together and realize that common ground may be limited, so let's try to occupy it together instead of, going quickly to the area where we might not agree, and that could disrupt the relationship. But I think most American people, regardless of party affiliation, are good, and they're decent, and they want good things, and they see decency and goodness in others, and it's obvious, painfully obvious, that Trump is neither good nor decent and doesn't have a lot of redeeming factors. And I think, the supermajority of the American people see that in his personal conduct, but also as reflected in some of his policies as well.
And finally, I had just touched upon the post or truth that Donald Trump had done earlier today about basically promising the annihilation of the entire civilization of Iran. He's since walked that back and taken his two week break, I think, as many people expected. But can I have your reaction to the idea that somebody who campaigned expressly on no new wars in the Middle East has not only launched a new war in the Middle East, but taken it so far as to threaten nuclear war in that region?
And this is someone who was complaining about the injustice he suffered. He was so aggrieved by not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. Nothing.
Right. Well, I mean, he did get arguably a better prize, and that was the FIFA Peace Prize. So you can't write that off.
The FIFA Peace Prize.
That's right. They don't just give that out to anybody.
Yes. He received that one on demand. There was no process, nor any peace requirements as part of that Peace Prize. But this is someone who wants the adulation. He wants the prize. He wants his ego fed. He can't stand that President Obama got it, but he didn't. And it's not commensurate with his conduct. And he's showing his true self. And look, he promised on the campaign trail no endless wars. He promised release the Epstein files. He promised he's going to reduce costs on day one. And he's raised costs. He has not released the Epstein files, and he has started new wars. And so he's completely hypocritical, sadly, as expected. And it's par for the course for him. And this bluster and this bluffing about total annihilation and kind of the taco Trump Trump always chickens out, and he goes 100 miles per hour, then he backs down, then he threatens and dangles the threat again. That's what he does, but he's way over his head here. I think he thought this was going to be quick, easy. He's learning a tough lesson on why there are endless wars, and he's dragged the United States into one despite his promises, raised gas prices in the process, and he's suffering the consequences with respect to his approval ratings. But let's be real, Americans are dying. This is not a war we need to be in. This is not a set of risks we need to be taking. And I think he's trying to get out of it as soon as he can, but he's finding how difficult it is. And his social media posts seemingly are at escalating levels of ridiculousness and inappropriateness.
Lunacy. Yeah.
I wonder what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, we will, of course, keep the conversation going as soon as we have any update on the results or first steps of the lawsuit to rein in Donald Trump's illegal executive order regarding mail-in voting. I'll be happy to have you back. So thank you for the work you're doing. Thanks for taking the time today.
Of course. Thanks, Brian. Good to see you.
To listen to the audio version of this episode, click the link on this screen and make sure to subscribe. And of course, to see more video content, that subscribe button's on the screen as well.